Okay, I think it's right about that time, everyone. So let's get started. My name is Andrew Salamatov, and I'm a program manager on the Outlook extensibility team. And today I'm going to tell you all about how to build an add-in for Outlook, for Outlook.com, and for Office 365 or Outlook web app, and how you can reach over 400 million users, just as the title suggests. Now, a few of you actually came up to me before the talk began. You're asking, will this be a kind of an overview of what's out there already today, or am I going to talk about some new stuff? And actually, most of the talk, more than half of the talk, is going to focus on some of the new features, some of the really new and exciting stuff that we've done over the past 6 months that we're going to reveal right here. But I'll also do a bit of an overview for those of you who are seeing this for the first time, just to catch everybody up to speed. So today we'll kick off by actually building an add-in for Outlook.com and Office 365. And I'll show you guys how simple and easy it is to get started. We'll cover the platform capabilities, and we'll obviously talk about the new entry points that I just mentioned. And finally, throughout the talk, you'll see a few examples of some of the really cool and interesting add-ins that some of our partners have built that we've been working closely with. And I really hope that for those of you who haven't built an add-in yet, that's going to be a source of inspiration so that you can go and build some really exciting scenarios as well. Now, there are three main takeaways that are important today. The first one is that getting started and building an add-in is extremely simple and easy. We have great documentation at dev.outlook.com to get you started and building these add-ins, and we just launched this website just a couple of days ago, so if you haven't heard of it before, that's why. The second one is that the platform itself is maturing, and it is both feature-rich and very powerful, so that you can build compelling, important, interesting scenarios for your users. Just like over nearly 60 add-ins in our store, just like nearly 60 partners in our store have already, and just like many, many line of business developers. And the last one is that the Outlook add-in platform is a great and amazing opportunity for you to reach hundreds of millions of users with your service or your idea or your experience. And so after this talk, I hope that all of you guys go jump on dev.outlook.com and start trying some of this stuff out. So as the title suggests, yes, you can build one add-in, and it will work across Outlook.com, Office 365, and Outlook. So let's see how that's actually done. So I'm going to switch into our great starting point. It's going to be the Outlook Dev Center. So by going to dev.outlook.com, and right away here on that front page, you can see that there are two main ways to integrate with Outlook across both consumer and business. You can connect to the Outlook service, and you can call our REST APIs, or you can extend Outlook with new UI features by clicking on Getting Started. And so this is the add-in experience. Now, here, the initial Getting Started page is talking about Office 365, but we're actually going to build an add-in for Outlook.com. So I'm going to click on Outlook.com, and you'll notice the disclaimer that you need a developer preview account. The add-ins are coming to Outlook.com, but that platform has not fully rolled out yet. So in order to build some of these add-ins, you will need a preview account, and you can email us at this email address. Now, for those of you who have already sent us mail, we did receive it. We've seen about 12 or 13 signups so far, and our entire team has been very busy putting all the talks together and putting all the material and content together, so I apologize ahead of time that we haven't gotten back to you yet. But we have been receiving your requests, and we'll be getting back to you as soon as we can. But once you have a developer preview account, then things get pretty easy. Go to napacloudapp.com and get started. So we went to Napa Cloud App. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with what this is, Napa is a web tool that helps you get started building add-ins. You can build different kinds of add-ins. You can build add-ins for Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, but we're going to build one for Mail. And Napa requires us to log in with our Microsoft account, our MSA. And so I'm going to choose a developer account. So this is going to be developer 10 in the spirit of this conference. I chose 10 instead of 9. and log in. And we'll give it a moment. And now this is the Napa tool. So as I mentioned, you can build an add-in for Word, Excel, or PowerPoint, but we're going to build this mail add-in. So let's give it a good name. Now, the scenario that I would like to build for you guys today is going to be fairly simple. Imagine the scenario going like this. You are communicating, you're sending an email to one of your coworkers that lives in a different country, and you really want to impress them with your amazing knowledge of their language. Well, if in case you don't speak their language, wouldn't it be great if you could type up the mail in English, and with a click of a button, it would just get translated immediately, and you can send it off. So that's what we'll build. We'll build a translation add-in. So I'll call this translation add-in. Hope I spelled that right. And I'll hit create. I'll give it a moment, and behind the scenes, Napa is actually creating us a template and generating app documents. And so the first page is actually our home page. This is our HTML page. Now, again, for those of you who are not familiar with add-ins, I'll go back and I'll go over exactly how the architecture works. But for now, just to keep up with us, this is the HTML page. There's also going to be some JavaScript logic code that's going to be doing the actual translations. And then finally, we'll talk about the manifest. Unfortunately, I cannot. But it's a great question. Yes. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make this add-in work in Compose. So right now, the add-in is actually, by default, the template is a read template. And so we're just going to uncheck this part because we want this add-in working in Compose. So I'm going to go into uncheck that this add-in is in read and instead switch to the Compose form and check the email messages. And I'll give it a start page and hit apply. And now we go back to our code, and I'll close the app read portion, and instead we'll go into home.html. And so this is our Compose section. And again, this is the basic template that Napa generates for us. If I ran this, we could try it, and we could play around with the basic template. And you guys would be able to play around with it too and see what it does. But let's actually build our translate add-in. And so to translate something, we'll need a translate button. So I'm just going to modify this template real quick. So we'll give it an ID of translate, and we'll change the title to say translate. And let me delete all of the other HTML just because we won't be using it. Now, as I mentioned, there's also some JavaScript code to write in order to make the actual translation happen. This is our basic JavaScript logic. You can see that the template, the first thing it does is it hooks up a couple of events to the buttons we just deleted. So set subject, it would call set subject. And right away from this template, you can start noticing how simple and easy it is to interact with the business logic of the app. The calls are extremely simple. It's just item.subject.setAsync, and you can set whatever subject you like. Of course, we're not setting subject, so I'm going to delete this out. Instead, what we're going to do is read out the user's selection. So we're going to ask the user to select some text. User clicks a button, and that will actually do the translation. So let me delete this part. And I believe I hope I named it the same way. Yes, I did. So translate ID. And then we'll create this translate function. And now we just need to add some code. And so I have my little cheat sheet here so that I'm not coding for half an hour. And these are the keys that we're going to call. We're going to call a web service that's actually going to do the translation for us. The one that I chose is Yandex, in case you're not familiar with it. It works just like Google and Bing, but it allows us to make JSON P requests, which is going to be very simple here. This is just a simple helper function that I pasted in. Don't worry too much about it. It's going to format the user's selection from the body in a way that we need to pass it to the actual service. But the final method, this is going to be the interesting one. This is where we're going to put in our business logic for doing the actual translation. And so I'm going to paste this in here, and let's just take a quick look at it. So what does the code look like? So again, it's office.context.mailbox.item. That's the item that we're working with. And then there's this method getSelectedDataAsync. Now, for those of you who have used our platform, you might say, hey, wait a second, I haven't heard about this method yet. This is one of the brand new methods that we added very recently to our platform. It allows you to get the selection. You'll also notice that it's hanging off the item object, which implies that you can get the user selection in the body, or you can get the user selection in the subject. It doesn't matter. That part is abstracted away. Once we've gotten the selection, then we just we call this format function to format the text, and then we'll make an AJAX call to the Yandex service so that it can do the translation. When we get back the response, this is where we call item.setSelectedData, and that's going to overwrite our current selection with the new text. And so we insert text to write, and we're done with the method call. OK, so this is our app. So let's actually run it. And I'll click the play button in Napa, and right away this box comes up. It's asking us where to deploy. So I'm going to deploy to the developer 10 account. So let me just provide the password and hit continue. And now what's happening behind the scenes is that manifest, which we didn't see yet, we'll cover that in a moment, but that manifest is actually being installed into my Outlook.com mailbox. And so now I can click on the link, and we'll give it a moment, and it's actually going to load Outlook.com for us. And there it is. So this is our Outlook.com mailbox. It looks just as our familiar Outlook.com mailbox does. But let's go to New. And now we have this brand new feature called Apps. Yes, we're in a little bit of a dichotomy here. These are add-ins. We're in the process of renaming and changing all of those titles to add-ins. So for now, there might be a little bit of confusion between apps and add-ins. So I'll click on Apps. And there's our translation add-in that we just built. And I'll click that to launch it. And then let's give it some text to translate. Will help you get started. Something nice and simple. Now, I hard-coded our add-in to translate into Russian. So if you understand Russian like me, you can comment on the quality of the translation. It's actually pretty good. But there it is. With a click of a button, we translated the text, and we've replaced it with something new. And now we can impress all of our colleagues around the world by pretending we can speak their language and write their language accurately. Fantastic. OK, so this is an add-in in Outlook.com. And this is just one of the add-ins that we have. We've been working and we've been partnering with multiple partners to deliver add-ins for our users and for our ecosystem. Now, you guys have seen in the keynote Uber already. But Uber is not the only partner that we've been working with closely. We have also been working with Baden on their Boomerang app. And let me show you how that works real quick. This is actually one of my favorite features. The Boomerang add-in gives me actually a couple of different choices. The first feature allows me to be reminded actually I can select in a couple of days if somebody does not reply to me. So this is a very typical scenario that I encounter all the time where I'll send off an email and I'm waiting for a response. And if nobody replies to me, I might entirely forget about this mail. Well, gee, wouldn't it be awesome if the system could automatically send me a reminder and say, hey, this person never got back to you. You might want to ping them. Or I can mark this message to be sent later, suggest some times to meet, and so on and so forth. So Boomerang is another partner that we've been partnering closely with, and that they'll be rolling out an add-in as well. But there's also one more that we're excited to announce, and that's PayPal. So PayPal is also coming to Outlook.com and also to Office 365 with some really cool integrations there. So wait, and you'll see shortly some of the great integrations they've built. OK, so far we've built the add-in in Outlook.com. But that's not enough. Because we said that we could build one add-in for Outlook.com and Outlook Desktop and Office 365. So for the second part of the demo, I'm going to actually download this project into Visual Studio. Again, as I mentioned, Napa is a great way to get started. You can definitely prototype some scenarios, but you can't really do server code in a web browser. So if you want to add server code, if you want to do something that's a little more complicated, you do have to switch to something different editor. And a gray one to use is Visual Studio. And Appa makes it super simple to integrate with Visual Studio. By downloading this project and clicking the executable, it's actually going to kick off Visual Studio. I'll give it a moment to launch. Sure. Exit. I don't want to install that. Just launch Visual Studio. Let me try that one more time. Visual Studio decided to update itself in the middle of the demo. Fantastic. Let's see if I can just launch Visual Studio. You can also publish it to the web. You can also publish this project to the web. Let's see. I guess we can just use that one. OK, assuming that we went through the Visual Studio update, in that case, Visual Studio would open with the project loaded. And at that point, we could just click the Start button. And now Visual Studio is going to prompt me for a similar thing, email address and password. But now notice, and it pre-populated this because I've already tried this demo previously. But it pre-populated it with now Office 365 credentials. And so I'll hit Connect. And what you'll see is actually a new a browser come up. But now it's going to be going to Outlook web app. And so here you can see it's actually a different URL. It's outlook.office365.com. So I'll hit Sign In. And we'll see our familiar Office 365 in just a moment. And so this is our tenant. And I'll click on New. Give it a moment to load apps. And there's our translator add-in. So this is how you can build one add-in across all the Outlook environments. The same exact code works in Outlook.com as it does in Outlook web app and in Outlook desktop. And you don't need to make any changes to it. Great. So now that we saw a demo of it, let's talk a little more about what's going on behind the scenes, especially if you're not familiar with the platform itself. So in terms of the architecture for Outlook add-ins, the way that it really works is, again, there's this concept of a manifest and HTML and JavaScript code. The manifest, it's an XML manifest, and it describes how the add-in integrates into Outlook, such as when it appears, what permissions it can use. But it also has a very important pointer to where this HTML is actually living, where it's hosted on the web. And it is that manifest that's actually saved to the user's inbox. And so that whenever any Outlook, Outlook.com or Outlook desktop or Outlook web app, or even Outlook on mobile devices, whenever any Outlook client pulls down the data from that mailbox, it gets the manifest, it reads it out, and it figures out, oh, OK, here's the source URL for the HTML. This is how I know to show it. And in terms of what can add-ins do once they're actually loaded, well, they have a few different functionalities. Really, the best way to think about it is how do add-ins appear? When do they activate, or when do they appear? And what can they do once they're actually running? So in terms of how do they appear, add-ins can appear in that add-ins can appear in a couple of different ways. First of all, they can appear based on regular expression matches, and we'll see a quick demo of that in a moment. But then they can also appear based on presence of entities in a message that I'm reading. And so Exchange and Outlook.com servers, when the mail actually comes in, they'll parse the body of the message. And if there's an entity like postal address or a meeting suggestion, they'll get stamped as a property on that message. And then if an add-in says, show me on any message that has this entity, in that case, we'll load up the add-in. So based on presence of entities, you can also show add-ins based on presence of attachments. That's how our DocuSign add-in works. Or even the type of an item. So you can restrict an add-in to only be shown on messages, or only on appointments, or only in compose, as we just did, or in read, or a mix of those. And when an add-in runs, it has access to an extensive JavaScript object model API. So it has access to core item properties in read and compose, such as subject, body, recipients. It also has access to attachments, which is an interesting way to read them out. And it can modify certain fields or certain properties or attachments while composing. So you can actually add attachments to a message while it's being written. Finally, you can launch native reply or appointment forms. And this would be very useful in the case of if you're building a meeting suggestion add-in and you want to show a new meeting form. The last part that we do provide access to is support for single sign-on. And single sign-on is a pretty important concept, so I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about it today. The whole idea behind single sign-on is that a user is going to use Outlook across multiple devices. He's going to use Outlook desktop on his computer. He might use Outlook web app at home on his personal computer, and perhaps Outlook web app in a browser on your iOS or your Android phone. But you don't want the user to sign into to Outlook and to the add-in specifically. You don't want the user to sign into the add-in multiple times. Every time I switch to the device, you don't want the user to have to constantly sign in. So Exchange and Outlook.com provide an API called getUserIdentityToken, which really simplifies this entire flow. And the whole idea is that the identity token includes inside of itself a unique identifier. And then an add-in can validate, cryptographically validate this token first. And then after the token is actually validated, it can then look up the user based on this, based on the unique identifier in the token. And this is, you can see a sample of the payload of a token. So you can see this MSXUID, that's the actual user identity token identifier. So how would this actually work? Let's say that we're building an add-in and we want to support single sign-on. How would this work? Well, the way it works is fairly simple. So the user is going to start in Outlook, and he's going to launch an add-in. Now, the first thing the add-in will do is it'll call getUserIdentityToken. This is going to force Outlook to make a call back to its mail server, Exchange or Outlook.com, and look up and actually generate a user identity token for the add-in. So that token will be passed back into the add-in. And now that the add-in has this token, it's going to pass it back to its own backend service to validate and look up the user and actually perform sign-in. So on the backend side, the add-in's backend gets the public certificate, validates the token. But next, it has to actually look up the user. And so it grabs this unique identifier. But if this is the first time the add-in sees the user, it's not going to be able to it's not going to be able to do anything with it. But that's OK, because then the backend tells the add-in, hey, I don't know who this user is. Prompt the user to log in with known credentials. And then I can create a mapping between this unique identifier and the actual user's identity. And so this is what the add-in does. So it'll do a quick prompt. The user can sign in there. And once the user has signed in via this prompt, then the actual association can be made. And now next time the user clicks on the add-in, that same exact identifier will be passed in. And now the backend can actually look up the user in its database and sign the user on. And for a great example of how to do this, you can actually take a look at the existing, there are multiple add-ins that already do this, but one great example is the DocuSign add-in that uses this. So if you're interested in enabling the single sign-on flow, you can load up their add-in and take a quick look at it. Cool. So let's take a quick look at what the manifest actually looks like and what some of this code looks like. So I'll go back to my to our translator add-in, and I'll just pull up the manifest just to demonstrate a couple of interesting features. So this is the XML manifest as it exists today. The key concept to take a look at is this form settings element. This is where developers specify the source location, the URL where the HTML and JavaScript is going to be hosted. Visual Studio marks it up with a temporary URL. This is for local host debugging. But you can actually replace it with your own server host once you're ready to publish. And the second part that's interesting and important is this section called rules. So the basic rule that we have is that this add-in appears on messages and in compose while you're composing a message. But you can actually make much more complex rules. So you could add new rules such as maybe this add-in appears whenever there's a regular expression match. And so you could type in rule, and then you can specify item has regular expression match, and you can give the regex a name, the value, that's the actual regex, and you can go so on and so forth from here and specify the actual regex. Or if you wanted to make your add-in load on, make it appear whenever there is a postal address present or a meeting suggestion entity detected, again, you can specify it right in this field right here, and you can specify the entity type. You could say address, and again, now your add-in will appear whenever there is an address in the actual message. Let's take a look at the JS code a little bit, and here, this specific project has both read and compose portions. So I'll just open the read side of it. So if your message is being opened while the user is reading, if the add-in is being opened while the user is reading a message, it has access to, again, a very simple to use JavaScript API. So here we can see that we're calling office.context.item, and then off of item, we have a number of different methods that you can invoke. So you can do something like item.subject, which is, sorry, it's in here. So you can call item.subject, but you can also do item.attachments, and you could specify 0, that's the first attachment, and then you could get its ID, or you could get its name, and go on from there. And you can, and again, you can also call a new display form and make calls to get the user identity token or grab a callback token to actually download the attachments themselves. All right. We've gone over the overview. Let's take a look at some. Let's take a look at some new stuff. Let's take a look at some of the new features that we've actually added to the platform in the past couple of months. But before we jump into what are the new entry points that we're excited to announce here, I wanted to take a brief moment to actually step back and talk about, provide some context as to why we felt that they're important, and also talk a little bit about our vision and where we're headed with this, with the platform. And so when we got done with our first version of the platform, which is what you've seen so far, we asked ourselves a question. You know, is this the best experience that we can deliver to our users? And of course, you know, the answer is, well, it's good, but it's not the best. We can do better. And so we took in a lot of feedback from partners such as yourselves, and we took a lot of feedback from our users. And we came up with 4 pillars for our vision, which are, first and foremost, add-ins must feel native and intuitive. And so the experience, the user interface with add-ins has to be extremely natural to users. We have to meet user expectation. It means that when we ask the user, hey, if you needed to click a button to translate this message, what do you think is the best experience for that? You know, a user is going to say, well, I just need a button. I don't need to click apps and then click on the add-in. Just give me a translate button. I just want to be able to click it. That's where I expect it. And if we ask the user, OK, and where would you expect this button to be? And they'll say, well, wherever the rest of my buttons are, you know, in the command surface. In Outlook, it's the ribbon. Similarly, if we ask the user, it's like, well, if you wanted to look up an address, how would you expect to do this? And again, the answer is very, very clear. The answer is always, well, I just want to click on the address. Show me the add-in right there. So add-ins must feel native, they must feel natural and intuitive, and they have to meet user expectation. The second pillar is that we have to leverage the UI framework of the host client. And this means that Outlook today uses many windows and uses many pop-ups. And Outlook Web App, it really uses more sliding panels. But that's OK. What we need to do is the platform must abstract those away via APIs and via declarative statements in the manifest, such as show my add-in. And then the client itself will figure out whether to show this add-in in a pop-out window or in a fly-out panel. Really, that doesn't matter so long as we preserve the right height and the right size requirements for that add-in. The third one, which is one of the most important aspects, is that entry points must scale gracefully. We can't have a successful platform, we can't have a great platform if when users install an add-in or when developers build an add-in and then we ship an update of Outlook, we break an add-in. Likewise, we can't have a successful platform if when the user installs 2 or 3 or 5 add-ins, he can only find 2 of them and then the other ones are hidden somewhere. And we also can't have a successful platform if when a user installs 2 or 3 add-ins, they all collide with each other and they break each other. And this happens every 3 weeks. That's just not going to be a successful platform. So the entry points have to scale gracefully, and they have to be discoverable and noticeable. And finally, and the last one, is also a key aspect that we've heard from our developers, is this notion of write once, run everywhere, and how important it is. And the reason why it's important is because when you leverage the technologies behind the add-in platform, the web technologies, you can have one developer that builds your add-in, and that add-in is going to work not only across Outlook.com and Outlook Desktop, but it's also and Office 365, but it's also going to work across desktop, tablet, and mobile. And so you don't have to have a developer from your iOS team go and build the add-in for iOS, and a developer from your Android team go build it for Android, and a web developer go build it for the web. You just have one guy who's responsible for the entire scenario end to end. And so with these 4 pillars, once we've collected them, we then went and we looked at the different scenarios that developers are trying to build, and we identified and we asked ourselves, okay, what are some of the interesting classes of scenarios that we want to support? So the first, or rather improve. And so the first set of scenarios is really around body text highlighting. It's this idea that if the user wants to view a map of something, he should just be able to click on the address, and that should be highlighted, and then the user should be able to see it. And so this is a quick screenshot of what we think it should look like. The whole idea is that if your add-in activates on a regular expression against a plain text body, we'll actually underline that match. And if a user clicks on that match, then we'll load your add-in in a hover card. Let me show you what this looks like in a quick demo. And so I'll go into my Office 365 account, Outlook, office365.com. Give it a moment to load up. And give it a second to actually pull down all of the add-in information. So here you can see the text is actually highlighted. So what happens when I see this? Well, let me click on it, and then there's the other part of the awesome Boomerang add-in that was built. This actually allows me to schedule a meeting, and so I can see that somebody's asking to meet with me and is asking me to suggest some times that I'm available. So by clicking here, I can immediately see, hey, am I available? Am I not? I can add the event, or I could suggest other times. I can click on that button, pull up my calendar, and see, oh, I'm actually available at a different time. Let me select something else to show. So this is one example or this is one reason why you might want to use this technology. But another great reason is all around ticket management. And this is actually this is an add-in that we use every day at Microsoft. We have a product called Product Studio that we track all of our bugs in. And you can imagine, and so the scenario that we use there is you can imagine getting an email and saying, hey, what do you think about this bug number? So today, the process is, OK, let me copy it down, go into my database, and look it up. Wouldn't it be really cool if you could just click on that bug number and have that little hover card appear and see all the data there? These are the kinds of scenarios that we're working with many partners on building and delivering to our customers and users. Now, this experience exists in Outlook web app today and also in Outlook.com. And we actually launched it in January. So for those of you who are not familiar with it, you can go jump in and start building this right now. All you need to do is specify a regular expression against the body, against plain text body of a message or appointment. And Outlook web app will automatically support this. This experience is also coming to Outlook desktop, but it's not there yet. And now the next feature, and this is the one that we're most excited to tell you guys about. This is the brand new stuff that we've been working on very hard for the past year. And this is the stuff that's coming to Outlook desktop first and then coming to the web right after that and also to mobile and everywhere else. It's this concept of add-in commands. Again, going along that thread of that thinking of, hey, how do we, if we ask a user about that translate button, what is the best way to do translate? User is going to tell us, well, I just want to have a button in the ribbon. And so today we're announcing, well, actually we announced it yesterday, but we're announcing that you can have add-in commands. You can actually program so that there is a button that appears in the ribbon of Outlook. And that button can do one of three things. Of course, we'll expand this later on, but today it can do two of the three things. The third one is coming. It can either launch a task pane on the right-hand side to give you more insights, or it can execute a JavaScript function without showing any UI. So again, in Translate, we don't really need UI. You can click a button and you'll be done with it. And dropdown is kind of the next main thing that's on our radar and that's going to be coming, but it's not supported yet. Now, the really cool part here is that add-in commands support backwards compatibility. And this means that you don't have to build a brand new add-in command and then wait for all the users to get there to use it. What you can do is you can build an add-in using the platform as it exists today, what you've seen, and then you can specify in your manifest. But if you're running in Outlook 16, take advantage of the new functionality. And so you can do that using the manifest. And this way, all of the users can get your add-in. The users on the older client get get the older experience. And the users on the new client, they can take advantage of the really cool stuff and the new features that are there. Now, one more word about the actual commands UI. It's built to scale. If you're familiar at all with Outlook or with Office and ribbons, you'll notice that as you change the width of it, they scale. The buttons go from being very big to being smaller, 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 and eventually they turn into small bits. This is how we hit that pillar of entry points must scale. Users can continue to add add-ins, and they're still right there in front of you. But those add-ins actually scale around. Now, commands can be either on the default tab, so in Outlook, the default tab is the Message tab in Compose, or it's called Home while you're reading the message or appointment. Or you can create one custom tab, and so you can have, and in the custom tab or in the default tab, you have a group. So in the default tab, you can have one group with 6 buttons. In the custom tab, you can have up to 10 groups. Each group can have up to 6 buttons. So in theory, you can have up to 66 buttons. Please don't do that. Please don't create add-ins with 66 buttons. We do have a validation team, so they haven't really been stretched yet, but I would be very interested to know what scenario requires 66 buttons, or even 64. And finally, commands that don't launch UI, and we'll talk about this when we actually look at them. They can show status messages on the mail item or appointment to convey progress, or to convey that something happened, or to convey errors. So what do these things look like? Nice little transition. And so here we see our Outlook 16 client. And here up on the right, I hope everybody notices right away, we've got 3 commands already installed. We've got do.com, we have Insightly, and we have Smartsheet. And now these are the partners we've been working closely with over the past couple of weeks. They've been working tirelessly to get some really awesome demos working with these add-ins. So how do they work? Well, imagine that I'm receiving an email message and I'm a salesperson. So I want to look up information about these guys in my Insightly CRM. With a click of a button, I can just load up Insightly and then give it a moment to pull down all of the contacts from the message. And Insightly is going to tell me all about who these people are. And so I can see, hey, there's Anthony Smith on this thread as well. And so I can see some information about him. Or I can add this message. I've already saved this message to CRM, but I could create a new opportunity, or I could create a new task or event from this message. The experience is, there are 2 main advantages to this experience. The first one is that there are icons right there in the ribbon. That is where all users go to take actions in Outlook. So your add-in is getting prime real estate and prime viewership. You're totally hitting that engagement. You're totally improving on the discoverability aspect. The second part is, of course, how much simpler it is to take any action. I just now need to do one click, and there we go. And we have the add-in actually load up. And the same is true in Compose. In Compose, I don't need to click on any apps button anymore. I just click on the button, and something happens, and I can view something. We have also been working with Smartsheet closely. And so Smartsheet also built a really interesting integration. In case you don't know who Smartsheet are, they do a number of different interesting scenarios. The main one's really around project management and making sure that everything comes in on time. And so here I have an email about some press conference gift, and I need to update a row. I need to update my Smartsheet project to make sure that I get everything done on time. And so I can search for my plans or my projects here, and here I can click on updating the row with the gifts, and I can click Save. And this is going to update. This is actually going to grab the two attachments here, the Excel attachment and the image, and it's going to save that off into Smartsheet. And so we can see that we've now updated the actual project with this information. Now, the really cool part about these add-ins is that there is no new code to learn. All you need to know is how do you specify that button in the manifest. And otherwise, it's the same exact experience as for building our translate button. It's the same exact code, the same HTML, and the same JavaScript that's got to be hosted. So this is what some of our partners have built in terms of task pane add-ins. Now, we'll get to building our own, but before we do that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the other kinds of buttons today, the function buttons, the ones where you click and then something happens. And specifically what I want to mention here is how these buttons work. So imagine that there is a track button, and it's an site lease track button. So I click track, and the message gets saved off. What happens behind the scenes? Well, what happens is that when I click on it, Outlook actually kicks off an IE process. And this IE process, users aren't going to see it, so it's entirely invisible to users. But behind the scenes, Outlook kicks off the IE process and loads in a function file. And so this function file has to be specified in the manifest. And directly invokes a function that's tied to that button that's also mentioned in the manifest. And then once it has invoked that button, or it has invoked that function, the function runs, the function calls I'm done, completed event, and then that's it. And then we destroy the IE process. So everything gets spun up, it runs through, and then it's completed. And overall, the performance is actually pretty quick. And so that's how we can make these buttons work and do work. Now, what you'll notice is that this button is actually going to be asynchronous in nature. User clicks on the button, but his UI is not going to be stopped. And this is a huge advantage over COM add-ins, because a COM add-in, if you lost network connectivity, if you hit some bug or some other problem, the user's client would be completely useless, so you wouldn't be able to do anything. In this case, the action is actually asynchronous. So the action gets called, and the user's UI is still functional. So the user can, most likely, the user will just wait for your function to complete. But if there's some error, if there's some problem, the user doesn't have to restart Outlook. It doesn't have to turn off his computer and restart that. You can just keep going. You just close the message and just go on to the next one. And the function will complete whenever it completes. So let's actually take a look at the code to see how we can build one of these. And so this is, so we're looking at Visual Studio now. And I'm going to load up one of my pre-created add-ins to go through the way that it works. So I'm going to load up the manifest for this add-in. So I already pre-created it, and then we'll walk through the JavaScript and also the HTML for this add-in. The main thing you'll notice, the first thing you'll notice, is that the header changed a little bit. We actually introduced a couple of new types, or a couple of new namespaces that create their own types. You might ask why. Well, it's really, it'll become obvious in a moment, but it's really to separate out the definition, the declaration of the UI from the actual resource strings themselves, and from, especially from language and locale overrides. Good call. This I can zoom in. How's that? Is that good? Perfect. So this is our add-in, again, a simple task pane add-in. The first portion of it, the form setting should look familiar, the rules should look familiar. Here's the new section. It's called version overrides. And this is the part that enables us to build something that's backwards compatible. So you can see that the first section, that instructs Outlook that does not have new functionality, how to render that add-in. But the version overrides, that's telling the new Outlook, hey, if you can parse this, use this stuff instead. Don't look at the stuff above it. And so in version overrides, you see this description element with this res ID, resource ID, which is something new, and I'll go into that in a little bit. But then you'll see requirements. Again, that's something familiar. We've been using this previously. And finally, we get to hosts. And this is the crux of the commands section. The command section consists of this function file, which we just talked about previously. That's for the buttons the function buttons that don't show any UI. And then a set of extension points. And extension points are ways that you integrate into Outlook. So if previously you would say, I have these rules, and here is where my HTML file is, and there was only one way to integrate. Now in the manifest, you actually say, I want to have these buttons. And then I also want you to underline the text for this regular expression match. And then I also want you to do something else. So you literally describe every point of integration. And so the point of integration here is this message compose command surface. Now, yes, we could have been extremely explicit, and we could have said something like message ribbon. But Outlook Web App doesn't have a ribbon. And mobile Outlook doesn't really have a notion of a ribbon either. And so we specifically wanted to be abstract here because we want to call these things for what they are. They are command surfaces. And there will be different command surfaces in different clients. But that's OK, because we're abstracting it away. The whole point is that it's just a command surface. We'll change the way Outlook looks like. But we'll keep the promise that if you declare this thing, your button is going to appear wherever that command surface is. So if we just parse it and go through it, what do we see? There's an Office tab, a tab default. That's the default tab. So we're basically saying, I want to integrate into the command surface, and I want to integrate in the default tab. And then we have a label. We have a tooltip for the group. And finally, we get to the control. That's the interesting part here. The control is a button. And so a button, what does it have? A label, a tooltip, a super tip if you want. It's optional. A couple of icons that you can define. Because again, that button can be large, or it can be medium, or it can be small, depending on how many add-ins are installed, and depending on how the size of the window. Again, the ribbon scales down, and so you need to specify multiple icons. And finally, there's this action. So in this case, we're going to show a task pane. So we say the action is show task pane. And then we provide the source location. And that's, again, that is similar to what we've seen up above, version overrides. That's just where the pointer to where the HTML for that task pane lives. So when you saw Insightly, it would be where that Insightly page is. Now, about these res IDs, one of the points of feedback that we received from a number of partners is that, well, whenever I have to describe, whenever I want to localize my add-in, I need to duplicate the localization a number of different times. And in this case, we realized that for certain icons, or for certain URLs, or for certain labels or tooltips, you might want to reuse the same text. Or even if you don't, and if you're localizing everything once, it's going to become extremely difficult to read the part that is describing how the button appears and the part that is just really all about localization. And so this is your resource table. We separated it out in the manifest. So you have a separate resource table full of images and URLs and strings. And then this is just the part where you describe how the actual code integrates. So it reduces the size of the manifest significantly. So that's our manifest. And then HTML, and let me increase the size of this guy as well. The HTML, if you saw the previous example, that's really the same exact thing for our translate button. So we're going to build the same translate experience here. It's really no different. Again, because it's a task pane, same exact HTML, and because it's a task pane, we're going to have the same exact JavaScript executing here as well. So it's our API key and the URL, the formatting of the text, and then our translate function, which hasn't changed. So let's actually run this guy and see this, this add-in in action. So it's asking me where to install. Again, I've ran this project before, so it already memorized all of my settings. I'm gonna hit connect, and hopefully I don't hit any network problems, and we get this add-in up and running. Now, I kicked off Outlook Web App. Outlook Web App doesn't actually support these commands yet. Outlook Desktop does. But that's OK, because all we need Visual Studio is to be hosting these files in localhost. And then I'm actually going to show them to you in Outlook. So I'm going to minimize Outlook Web App. And instead, I'm going to go into Outlook. And there's our translation task pane. So if I click on this guy, here's our translate button. And I can click on hello, hit translate. And there you go, привет. So it did a accurate translation. And so now we've got a task pane. So now you guys know how to build task panes. Awesome. But let's go one step further, and I'll close this guy. Let's build that function button, because that's going to be one of the most interesting, important scenarios that you guys work on. That is the most basic experience for a user. If you can do a scenario in one click, everybody's going to use it. So how would you do a one-click experience? I'll go to my other VM here, and let me load up Visual Studio real quick. And I'll go into another project that I created. And so here, let me go to the manifest. So here, again, we have the same thing, version overrides, and we have the description. We've got requirements mentioned and the host. But here, the extension point is going to be a little different. So yes, extension point is still message compose command surface. But now the button, the control, the button, is going to have a different action. Now the action is execute function, and we have this function name called translate. And if I scroll up, here's our function file. And so let me scroll down, because this thing is referencing a resource ID. Let me scroll down and show you how it's actually specified. So here's my function file URL. That's that resource ID. And here's the URL for the file that's going to be loaded, the HTML file that's going to be loaded into that IE process when I click the translate button. So this HTML page is going to be loaded. Now, although the HTML page is going to be loaded, because there's no UI to show, we don't have any UI in HTML. The only thing we do have is the actual JavaScript for the actual function file. And if I go to my function file, you can see that it's, again, this common JavaScript that we're already used to, and this common set of APIs. So office.initialize, again, this is the common way you initialize the Office JavaScript API. We have all of this code to translate. And we have this translate function. And again, if I come back to my button, so here we specified function name translate. And well, there it is. This is the actual event that's going to get invoked when I click that button. So if you specify multiple buttons to be in that group, you would specify different functions. Like you could say translate, and I don't know, you could have another function foo. And if you and so you would specify foo in the manifest, and then that would get invoked here. So it's not like we execute all of the JavaScript. We directly invoke a specific function in your function file. But this is our common code, and this is our common functionality that we're used to, that we've been calling. One important aspect here is that at the end, you have to call event.completed. This notifies Outlook that you're done, and we can destroy the actual IE process so that we can keep going with what we're doing. All right, so let's run this, and let's see what this looks like. So again, same thing is going to install, Visual Studio is going to install the add-in into my mailbox. Give it a moment, and again, it's going to launch Outlook Web App, but that's not what we care about right now. We're testing this in Outlook. So I'll go into Outlook, click on New Mail, and here's our new Translate button. So it's this one, oops. This is going to be the one that doesn't show any UI. And click a button and give it a moment, and looks like translation came back with some extra characters. But there we go, and so it did the translation. Notice how fast it was. We can generate that frame very quickly. And because there's no HTML to show, there's no rendering. So you can really build very quick and easy buttons and simple scenarios for users to use and make them very productive. But imagine for a moment that you were building something that's a little more complex. Like you were building track in CRM. And that call does actually take a little bit of time. It has to do some, it has to make a web services call, but then it also has to process something. How do you tell the user, hey, there's actually something going on? If you noticed when I clicked the button, it just got clicked, and that's it. Well, we actually came up with a new API. We call it Notification Messages API. And this API enables you to do a couple of different things. And so let me go back to my JavaScript code here, and I'll close this guy. And again, I'll reference my cheat sheet so that I'm not trying to remember on stage the syntax. Here it is. So we have this Notification Messages API, and it allows me to do a couple of different things. I can specify a informational message, and this would be used to tell the user, this item is now being tracked in CRM. Now, I can specify an informational message, and I can also specify that this message sticks around so that every time I come back to this item, that message is there. It's a persistent message. Or I could specify a progress indicator. And if it's a progress indicator, then that will be shown until you actually remove it. So you can add notification messages, you can replace notification messages, and you can remove notification messages. It's up to you how you want to use it. So again, for an informational message, that's used to convey final state. You can convey an error by calling an error message, and we'll show our own little error icon. Or if you want to show a loading or a processing screen, then you would show a progress indicator. And in that case, when you call it, then we'll show this message. And then you have to call remove or replace with an informational message or an error message. And then we'll replace it to something else, to a final state. In this case, let's just show a quick informational message, because really our action is not quick enough to warrant a loading dialog. You can ignore this part. This is just some debugging information. You really don't need to specify this. But again, so you specify a key. That's how you know what to remove or replace later. Informational message. We mark that it's persistent. And finally, the message itself. This message has been translated. And you can also specify an icon from the manifest. So that's what that icon ID is. It's referencing some icon in the manifest. OK, so for a final quick demo, let me just close this guy. Load up the manifest gets installed, loaded up Outlook web app. And let me go back to this guy, click new, select this text, translate. And there we can see that now we added this informational message. So again, if you were building a track button, you would say something like, this message is now being tracked, and it's persistent. The user could dismiss it if he doesn't need to. So congratulations, guys. Now you know how to build add-ins with commands. Well done. Now, with the last minute and a half that I have remaining, I wanted to stress our commitment to developers in making add-ins easily accessible to users, easily discoverable by users, and making sure that our users are able to find and get the most useful and the best add-ins that they can. With the May product update in Outlook, we're actually adding, so this is in Outlook 15, the click-to-run experience, Outlook 2013, the click-to-run experience. We're actually adding a store button right there on the default tab, on the home tab of Outlook, so that all users, this is where users spend 80% of their time. All millions of users that are using Outlook 2013 are going to get the store button. And by clicking on that, they get immediately into the store, and they can start adding, and they can start getting add-ins. But that's not all. If you saw my talk last year, I ended my talk by saying, here's the permission model, and here are the kinds of add-ins the users can install, and here are the kinds of add-ins that administrators can install. We actually removed that, that part entirely. So end users can install any app from the store that's listed there. And not only that, but they can also sideload apps. So If you build your own add-in and you say you want to go to your friend in your company and you say, hey, try this thing out, here's a manifest. They can just go into their mailbox and they can install this add-in for themselves and try it out. So not only can users get add-ins, any add-in from the store, but they can also get any add-in that's built in-house, any line of business add-in that's built in-house for themselves. The last slide, last point, calls to action. 3 calls to action. Go to dev.outlook.com, where you'll find great documentation across consumer and business on how to build add-ins. But you'll also find great resources for getting started and building your add-ins. If you want to try out these new add-in commands features that I've just been showing, you can go to joinoffice.com, that's that bottom link, and that will give you access to download preview builds of Office 16. It'll be click to run. The May update, the April update will actually have support for task pane add-ins. The May update will have support for task pane commands. The June update will have support for these function buttons and these UI-less buttons. And finally, if you want to try out building for Outlook.com and you want to try your add-in in there and just make sure that it works, you want to give us feedback, please send us an email to outlookdev@microsoft.com, and we'll ask you a couple of questions, and then we'll get you a developer preview account that you can get going with and that you can start building. We'd love to hear your feedback, so please support us and please give us feedback over at dev.office.com or dev.outlook.com. We've got multiple different places that you can do this. And check out our developer program. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time today. I hope this was informational and interesting to you guys and as exciting as it is to us over at Microsoft. So thanks for your time, and go build some awesome scenarios.